So we'll go ahead and get started. I call this meeting to order. Roll call.
Baker.
Here.
Carlson. Parker.
Here.
Russo. Swigert.
Here. Now I'll read an opening statement that describes the board and the procedures. The Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial body created by the City of Iowa City according to state statutes. The board's purpose is to decide on applications for variances from the zoning ordinance, appeals of decisions of city officials, and applications for special exemptions requested under the zoning ordinance. The Board of Adjustment is an independent volunteer board made up of Iowa City residents and is not part of the city administration. We are assisted in our work by the city attorney's office and by planning staff. Prior to this meeting, board members received the materials submitted by the applicants and staff reports reviewing the application and any correspondence submitted by members of the public. Board members have not discussed the application or its merits with each other, staff, the applicant, or any other members of the public in advance of this meeting. All consideration and discussion by the board takes place in open meeting here tonight, where we also have an opportunity to hear from the public. The board bases its decisions on facts and evidence allowed by city code presented in open meeting. Concise and truthful testimony helps us a great deal in our decision-making. We ask that if you wish to speak, that you come to the podium, print your name and address on the sign-in sheet, and speak clearly into the microphone so your testimony can be heard by all present and by our minute taker, as all testimony becomes part of the public record. We ask that the proceedings be orderly and that when you are testifying, you address your remarks to the board. If this hearing becomes lengthy, we may ask that testimony be focused on new facts or on information not already presented. The order of proceedings for each application will be an oral report by staff summarizing the issues of the case and staff's recommendations, an opportunity for the applicant to speak, an opportunity for any other interested parties to speak for or against the application, an opportunity for final statements and arguments by the applicant and staff. The board will discuss the issues and evidence, state its findings, and vote on a motion. Motions are always made in the affirmative. So the first item on our agenda, EXC 23-0008, an application submitted by Missy Forbes of Community Coordinated Child Care, parentheses 4Cs, end parentheses, requesting a special exception to allow a daycare use in a low-density, single-family residential RS5 zone for the property located at 1839 B Street.
Madam Chair, I just want to let you know that I've talked to Kurt, who has talked to the city attorney, about a possible conflict of interest on this item since my son is on the board of directors of this organization. But we have decided that as long as I can be objective and impartial, it should not be a problem. And he and I have had no communication whatsoever about this issue.
All right, the public hearing is open and we'll have staff report.
Thank you. So, as discussed, this is to allow a child care use at 1839 B Street. You can see it on the location map before you right now. It's located east of 7th Avenue, south of Court Street, to kind of give you an idea, near Chaddock Green Park. The primary access to the property is from B Street, which is to the north of the property, It's also a bit unusual in that there's an alley to the south that exits onto Fifth Avenue and Garden Street, but it does bisect this property. So there's a portion of the lot that's north of the north of the alley, and a portion that's south of the alley. The property is in a lower density single-family neighborhood, which is reflected by its RS5 zoning, or low density single-family residential zoning. So in terms of what's being proposed, 4Cs has an offer to purchase the subject property at 1839 B Street to use as a childcare. They've indicated an interest in using it for up to 120 children. The property is an older property. It was built around 1960 as a church, but it's been used as a fraternal lodge by the Independent Order of Oddfellows since around 1974. It was built prior to its current zoning, so there are several legal nonconformities that are allowed to continue as long as the building isn't expanded or structurally altered. And the applicant is proposing several sets of site improvements as well. So I just want to bring up the site plan to talk through these. So for the most part, vehicular access will be the same on that north portion. One of the big changes is that the drives to the west of the building would become one directional, so you would enter it from B Street and go south down to the alley. Another change is that there would be a pedestrian connection that would be added through the site all the way from the right-of-way to the portion of the property that is south of the alley. There would be a demarcated crossing over the alley as well. And in addition, that south portion would also have a new parking area that would be added, as well as a play area. Again, those would have access with that pedestrian site. It's also hard to see on here, but the alley is proposing to add landscaping screening, which complies with our current standards. And then also the alley is showing, or the applicant is showing alley improvements as well from the property line east over to Fifth Avenue. Here's a picture of the current property looking south from the street, so you can see the abutting sidewalk or the current pedestrian path to the building. That would be extended through the site. There is currently no east-west sidewalk in front of it in the public right-of-way. You can also see this from the rear. This is looking west in the alley. It is currently paved, so it's hard to tell which portion of the property is actually the private property and which is the alley, but that's the portion that would be improved, and you can also see the rear of the building there as well. So tonight, the role of the Board of Adjustment is to approve the conditions, or deny the application based on the facts presented. And to approve it, the board must find that it meets all applicable approval criteria, including specific and general standards. So the specific standards pertain to the daycare use, and the general standards apply to all special exceptions. So when we're talking about these daycare standards, they're found in the City Code at 14.4B.47. There are several of them. The first is that there are required interior activity areas that must contain at least 35 square feet of usable interior floor space per child. There are certain excluded areas, which are mostly bathrooms, offices, and hallways as well. So in terms of this subject property, it's a pretty large property, so it has nearly 7,800 square feet of usable interior floor space. Theoretically, that could accommodate up to 222 children. It is more restricted based on the parking and some other site elements than its floor area. Like I said, the applicant proposes using it for a child daycare use with up to 120 children, so it's well below the maximum that would be allowed. Next is required outdoor areas, which is that the child care use must provide a fenced outdoor play area of not less than 100 square feet per child, based on the maximum at any given time. There are setbacks for playground equipment, which is not permitted within side setbacks or the front setback, and these areas must be well drained, free from hazards, and readily accessible to the daycare center. It also must have a fence that encloses the child care area, or the outdoor play area, that's at least 4 feet in height. So the property is zoned residential, so that 4-foot standard applies. All playground equipment shown on the site plan is located outside of those restricted areas. And the site plan does include an outdoor play area that's approximately 2,156 square feet, so that could accommodate up to 21 children at a time. It's surrounded by a 4-foot fence, as indicated on the site plan, and is also accessible by a pedestrian path with the demarcated crossing in the alley. I also did just want to note that in terms of outdoor play areas, it's within easy walking distance of that Chaddock Green Park as well. But based on this, staff does believe that this standard is met. There is a possibility that the play area could be expanded in the future, which would allow more kids outside as well. For vehicular circulation, the use must provide a drop-off pickup area in a location that is convenient to or has good pedestrian access to the main entrance of the facility. It has to contain sufficient stacking and parking spaces as well to ensure that it doesn't back up into adjacent streets. In terms of the way that that's structured, I already discussed it. It's expected to flow in one direction from B Street to the north down to the alley and exit east onto Fifth Avenue. The alley is currently unimproved, so the site plan that shows an improved alley, staff does recommend that that be a condition of approval of tonight's special exception. In terms of ongoing maintenance, that's handled by adjacent property owners, mostly putting that as a heads up for folks. The subject property does have 29 parking spaces on it. 15 of those are in the new spaces south of the alley, and then there are 14 existing non-conforming spaces north of the alley, some of which are in front of the building. The site also has 7 stacking spaces that are west of the building on a 9-foot wide one-direction drive, and all parking and stacking spaces are connected to the building with pedestrian routes, so staff does believe that this criterion is met. There are also, continuing with this criteria, the minimum parking requirement for this is 1 space per employee based on the max employees on site at any one time, 1 space for each 10 kids served by the max number of children on site at any one time, and then 1 stacking space for each 20 children served by the max number of children on site at one time. Those can also, the 20 children for stacking spaces can also be switched out for parking. But like I noted earlier, the parking is the primary limiting factor in this building. Based on the stacking spaces provided, you could have up to 140 kids. However, it is adequate to accommodate the 120 children that are proposed, in addition to 17 staff members. But that final number of spaces would be determined by the actual number of staff and children on site, which could vary over time. The applicant also anticipates that many family and staff will access the site by walking, biking, or bus, because the property is about a quarter mile or less than a quarter mile from the nearest transit stop, and the site plan does show bicycle parking that meets the minimum requirement on the site. Next is tied to pedestrian circulation, which is that a sidewalk must be constructed connecting the main entrance of the center to the adjacent public right-of-way. It must be clearly separated from vehicular circulation to minimize conflicts between the two users, vehicular and pedestrian. So there is a sidewalk that already exists from the main street to the public right-of-way. There is no sidewalk along the B Street right-of-way, so it leads to the street, not to a sidewalk, but it is there. The site plan also proposes new sidewalks with raised curbs through the property along the west and south sides of the building. That helps minimize the extent to which users must walk across drives or aisles. Staff does also recommend a condition that any new pedestrian routes through the site have a raised curb to help ensure pedestrian safety. So in this criteria, it doesn't specify that it has to be a raised curb, but staff would recommend that that be a condition of approval. Next is related to site development standards. So if it's located in a residential zone or the central planning district, it must comply with the multifamily site development standards in this title. In this case, the proposed use is in both the residential zone and the central planning district, so it has to comply. The building and site do meet some multifamily site development standards, but not standards related to the location and design of surface parking, mechanical equipment, and additional standards in the central planning district. That being said, all of the existing non-compliant features are either considered elements of a non-conforming structure or non-conforming development. So that means that a change in use can occur provided it does not increase or extend the non-conformity. In this case, it does not. And all changes to the site being proposed, specifically with the new site elements being added, those do comply with current zoning standards. So staff does believe that this criteria is met. Which brings us to the general standards that apply to all special exceptions found at 14.4B3. There are 7 of these. So the first is that it can't be detrimental to or endanger public health, safety, comfort, or welfare. It is an existing building that's been around for a long time. and the building and site characteristics are well suited to a daycare use. With the conditions discussed through this presentation, we do believe that that helps mitigate any potential impacts due to increased traffic, and we believe that the proposed use will provide services that are beneficial to the neighborhood and the community as well. So with that, staff believes that this criterion is met. The next standard is related to whether it will be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the immediate vicinity or substantially diminish or impair property values. It is located in an existing building. There are no changes being proposed to that building. Outdoor play areas are relatively small and set back and screened from adjacent properties, which staff believes will help mitigate noise impacts. Additional traffic will be generated by the use, but it'll be during business hours, and the proposed traffic flow and site layout with the recommended conditions, staff believes will help mitigate these potential negative impacts. In addition, with the new parking areas that are south of the alley, those are adequately set back and screened from abutting uses according to our standards. But staff does recommend that the S2 screening shown on the site plan be a condition of approval as well. Since that is an element that's being brought into conformance with our zoning code, it would not be required as a non-conforming development, so that's why we're recommending that it be a condition of approval. But with that condition, staff believes that this criteria is met. Next is that it won't affect surrounding development, the orderly development and improvement of surrounding properties, that is. It is an area that's fully developed as a residential neighborhood, and it's occupying an existing structure that's been around since the 1960s. It will provide beneficial services that staff doesn't believe will substantially impact the development or improvement of surrounding properties, and we believe that the conditions will help mitigate any potential negative impacts for those surrounding properties. So with that, staff believes that this criterion is met. Next is that it has adequate facilities. It is an existing area, so it has utilities, access roads, and other facilities already provided and established, and it was largely developed without sidewalks, but there is a pedestrian connection to the right-of-way and through the site. We believe that conditions help ensure that the infrastructure can handle increased traffic volumes, specifically along that alley, and any changes to site features will be evaluated for compliance with city standards at site plan and building permit review, including those related to drainage. So staff did consider requiring a sidewalk in front of the building as well, since that's not something that's provided in this area. But because it's a condition where it's the broader neighborhood that doesn't have sidewalks, adding a sidewalk specifically in front of this one building, staff doesn't believe that that's necessary to improve the safety of the area as well. So I did just want to note that verbally. It was not included in the staff report, but that's why we didn't look at that. The next standard is related to ingress and egress design to minimize traffic congestion on public streets. So like I had noted, the front is accessed from B Street with the rear accessed from the alley. Most traffic is expected to flow one directional through the site, exiting east towards Fifth Avenue on that alley. In terms of staff and drop-off traffic, that'll utilize the stacking spaces as well as some of the alley where there's additional parking spaces in the rear of the building. Those are connected to the rest of the building by a pedestrian route and a demarcated alley crossing. There is also signage and pavement markings shown to help direct traffic through the site, which will help minimize that traffic congestion. In addition, the conditions will ensure that the alley can handle anticipated traffic volumes prior to the occurrence of the site based on the way that we are recommending the condition. In terms of other changes to the site, there are no other changes proposed to the existing street or drive on the portion of the property north of the alley, and the new parking on the portion south of the alley does comply with all current standards. In addition, I had noted that the applicant anticipates many family and staff accessing it from other modes of transportation, and it is near an existing transit stop. So with these factors under consideration, staff believes that this criterion is met. Next is that it complies with all other standards in the zoning code. So like I noted earlier, it does meet most standards of the RS5 zone, but it was built prior to the current zoning designation that it has. So there are elements that don't meet current standards. Those are things like the way that parking backs into the alley wouldn't typically be allowed, the width of the aisle in front of the building does encroach into the side setback and the need to provide parking lot trees. Those are things that are currently non-conforming that would be allowed to continue as non-conforming. in addition to those site elements I discussed that are part of the multifamily site development standards. However, this does bring several elements of the site into compliance with current standards, especially with proposed conditions related to, for example, the new landscaping buffers. And as things change in the future, staff will ensure that any new changes comply with relevant standards during building permit and/or site plan review, which is our regular process to check those things. But with those, staff does believe that this is met. And then finally, that it's consistent with the comprehensive plan of the city as amended. As far as the future land use map designation for this area, the comprehensive plan shows it as residential, but the central district plan, which provides more specific guidance, shows it as private institutional. The comprehensive plan also generally supports providing goods and services within convenient walking distance for residents in the immediate area. And the proposed exception would convert what is an existing private institutional use to another private institutional use. So with that being the case, this is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the district plan as well. So based on these findings, staff does recommend approval of EXC 23-0008 to allow daycare use in a RS5 zone for 1839 B Street, subject to 3 conditions that I've mentioned throughout the report. Those are that 1, design improvements to the alley from the area abutting the subject property to Fifth Avenue to the east, in addition to any pedestrian crossings, be designed to the satisfaction of the city engineer prior to site plan approval, and they must be accepted by the city engineer prior to issuance of a certificate of occupancy. 2, that screening to the S2 standard be provided between parking areas and adjacent properties along the east and west property lines as shown on the site plan that was submitted as part of this application. And then 3, that any new pedestrian routes through the site that directly abut parking areas be separated by a raised curb or barrier that is a minimum of 5 inches in height. And we did receive some correspondence that is included in your packet. It was generally positive. We also received some calls, but most of them were asking clarificatory questions. We didn't receive others that came late or anything like that. So with that, that ends staff's presentation. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions for staff?
See if Bryce had anything.
Bryce, do you have any questions?
I think do you have a map? Can you show me the raised curb? Do I have to say that to him?
Yeah, so the raised curb, let's go back to the site plan. So the new raised curb is where you have it's where that cutoff line is here to the kind of the northwest portion of the building. So there is an existing pavement that goes from the site to the main entrance. This would basically carry it around the house or around the property, have it be on the south side of the building, and then run it along kind of the east property line there. So that's where we're proposing it would be a raised curb. In addition to, it would need to be separated from the parking area by a raised curb as well. But typically with parking areas like that are new, you would have a curb regardless, so.
And then this side of the block does not have any sidewalk on
Correct.
any of property.
Correct. And so if there were sidewalk added, typically what we see in those situations is requiring it or not requiring it, but the city would come back in and build the sidewalk themselves. That's typically what we see. Sometimes if you have partial sidewalks there,
'Cause I know
we'll require it and it kind of
around
gets pieced
the
in.
other side of this block, yes, you have stop, go, park,
Yeah.
sidewalks.
Typically, if it doesn't improve the connectivity, we wouldn't typically require it. We do have the ability to require it through site plan or as a condition of approval here. But
But
staff,
then it's one-off.
yeah, it wouldn't improve the connectivity, really. It would possibly lay the groundwork for future connectivity, but
Okay. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. I sometimes don't get it the first time around, so you got me cleared up. On page 3, you talk about the applicant using a figure of 120, But I think I heard you say that they have the infrastructure parking in particular in place for up to 140. Is that right?
So stacking spaces would be 140. With that, I don't think that they can get the staff that they want on site. So that's why I think they're considering 120. And even in some other materials, they've talked about 100 kind of being their starting place, but they might ramp that up over time. So it would really be that trade-off of, number of children versus number of staff. I think that's also a question you can ask the applicant about kind of their plans on that. But it's really parking that is the limiting factor here.
Okay,
So
so-
stacking spaces would allow 140. They're proposing 120. I mean, if you're looking at just the building, you could have 220 or whatever I said.
So there's an implicit cap of 120 right now. So we don't have to make that explicit in the recommendation at all.
So if you believe that it was necessary to place a cap on the number of children to satisfy one of the approval criteria, it's well within your ability to place, 120 or 100 as your cap.
Okay.
But staff didn't believe that that was necessary since there's, allowing some flexibility in the way that it's constructed based on the number of parking spaces there seemed appropriate to us.
Okay. Also on page 3, you use the figure of 2,156 square feet outdoor area. Does any of that include the paved area south of the alley?
It does not.
Okay, so that's undeveloped and it will be fenced in.
Correct.
Okay. Parking, the paved area that's there now, parking will be used there in the future?
Yes, so they're allowed to continue using the existing parking that they have on site.
Is 15 or 17 spaces or 15 spaces?
I want to say it's 9 plus 4 maybe, or 5, no, it's 14, I think.
Okay. When I was out there the other day looking at it, that's not a straight line between the alley on one side and the alley on the other side. It comes in at an angle. And so that paved area on the alley back towards B Street, doesn't seem to have enough depth for parking places on one end of that paved area. Is there a minimum requirement for the depth of a parking space?
It is. It's 18 feet. Based on the submitted site plan, it appears that they could meet it. It could also potentially be 15 feet if it were a compact space, but they are showing compact spaces in that portion south of the alley, so they can have half of their spaces be compact.
Okay.
Those are the things where, with engineered drawings, we rely on the engineer to tell us where the property lines are, since they're the ones going out and surveying the site and those sorts of things. So based on the site plan that's been submitted, there appears to be space for that.
So the two sections of the alley, there's a right-of-way implicit connecting those two? Or is it two separate alleys?
I'm not sure I'm following your question.
I'm just wondering if the short spaces on the southeast corner.
Oh, the southeast corner, they're taking out.
Okay.
So the parking spaces that they'd be retaining, those spaces are probably in the alley already and probably not allowed. The only spaces that they're keeping are the ones directly next to the building. Otherwise, everything south of the alley, because they'd be reconstructing the alley and then they'd build a parking lot to the south of it connected to it.
Okay. About that alley, you're talking about improving the alley. What kind of surface is considered an improvement there?
Concrete. It would be your typical alley that you'd see in a new development.
Concrete or asphalt?
It would be determined by the city engineer. But I think they typically do concrete, is my understanding.
Because, I have a lot of experience with gravel alleys, and they just don't work at all.
It would not be a gravel alley, which is why we're recommending the condition.
Okay. And the applicant will pay for the complete paving of the alley,
Correct.
even past their property lines?
Correct.
Okay. But
So it'd be an off-site improvement that would be required as a condition because of the heavy use of the alley that we anticipate as a result.
And it says the adjacent property owners are responsible for maintenance and snow removal in the future. So I noticed that there was no good neighbor meeting. I'm just wondering if the adjoining neighbors they already have this responsibility, so I assume
Yeah.
that's been taken care of in the past somehow.
Well, I think people do get confused in alleys. Those are the responsibility of adjacent property owners. That's the way that it is. I mostly put that in there to make it clear that that's the case, since it can be confusing sometimes for folks.
And from this drawing right here, I mean, it looks like the improved alley goes to, I don't know what direction this is, to the east.
East.
But it also goes to the west.
It does not go to the west. So
I think that's, Larry, what you were asking, if the entire alley would be improved.
it would not.
No, I was
Okay,
I was
okay.
thinking just of that portion leading
Okay.
from the property back to Avenue,
Gotcha.
B Street. That's all I got for now. I've got some questions for the applicant later. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. The newly built parking lot, on the site plan, it notes there are 8 compact stalls. Do those have to have signs?
I believe that they do, yes.
Okay. My other question has to do with outdoor lighting. So when I was there, 2 trips, both day and night, I noticed there are several floodlights along the roof line. The 2 in the front were obviously there to illuminate the flag that used to be flown. That there is one also on the side where the entrance is. And when I was there at night, or last night, there was just, a light by the door similar to what would be a porch light. There was no other illumination. I'm just curious about those floodlights. Do they have to be brought up to current standards? In other words, be shielded, they're not shielded, and I don't know how much light they put, what their lumens are and all that stuff.
Sure. So if it's an existing feature of the property, it would not have to be brought up to current standards. That could be a condition if the board finds it necessary to address those issues, bring the lighting up to standards. I know that there are exemptions for flags.
Right.
But
Well, and it depends whether the applicant intends to continue to fly a flag. They may or may not, and you can also take them down at night. But I'm more concerned about light trespass into the neighbor on the
Yeah.
adjacent part of that drive.
Yeah, any changes to the building would have to be, like if they update the lights or something, then it would be have to be brought into conformance, but just the change in use does not trigger it.
Okay. And currently, there is a street light in the alley that would illuminate that new parking lot area. Are you aware of any plans for further outdoor lighting?
I am not. That would usually be reviewed at site plan review, and any new light would have to comply with our current standards. But that could also be a condition if, for safety, if that is tied to that criteria or a different criteria.
It seemed to light up the area fairly well. I just didn't know if you were aware of additional lighting for that parking lot area.
I am not. It was not shown in the
Okay.
site plan submitted.
Okay. All right. Those were my questions. Anybody else have any more questions
Not for staff.
at this
no.
time? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Would the applicant like to speak, come to the podium, sign in, and present any information to the board?
Hi, I'm Missy Forbes. I'm the Executive Director at Four Cs. I would be happy to answer any questions, or I can give you a brief overview of the intention of the project. I'm not sure.
I'd like to hear what you.
Sure. So part of our part of our mission is to look at barriers to children accessing quality early childhood educational experiences, which we know leads them to be better citizens and students and things like that. One of the things that we have intended to do intentionally is look within our community to see where there are deserts or pockets of our community where their child care isn't accessible or as accessible as it could be. And we identified this particular area of Iowa City to not have any, not that there isn't close childcare within a mile footprint, but just kind of a closer, I think there's about a mile radius where there isn't either any child development home or childcare center. And then we also identified that it was pretty close to a bus line. And then there's a building that was for sale. So that was sort of all of the points kind of pointed to doing a deeper dive into the property and what we could potentially do to put a childcare center in that part of town. And so that's kind of a higher overview of what we're trying to accomplish with this project. Also knowing that affordable childcare for families that are, experiencing, or that are in a certain socioeconomic status have a harder time finding childcare. And so part of the project would be to make sure that we're taking at least 50% of the children there would be on the state subsidy childcare assistance as well. So while, we are welcome or open our doors for any child, we are specifically looking to tackle the problem of not having enough childcare assistance slots in Iowa City. And then we know infant care is also hard to find, so we may look at modeling our program to address the needs of where the age ranges are harder to find that childcare for that particular age range. It's been infant care for a long time, and so we'd probably focus on that too specifically, but really being able to open up slots in Iowa City that address the childcare assistance too, so.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
And we do also, I brought our civil engineer here also, so if there are questions specifically about the site plan that you may have, he could probably answer that much more succinctly than I could.
All right, thank you. Questions for Missy? Well, I have questions about the lighting, and maybe you don't know because I'm not sure how familiar you are with the building. Do you know offhand if you will be putting a flag out in the front with the flag, the current flagpole, flying the American flag, or?
Sure. I'm not sure what kind of improvements or what we would do currently. We're just kind of getting through this hurdle.
Sure.
So, but I mean, knowing that there is a flagpole there and what the standards are about that, we would certainly comply with that. But we haven't done too deep of a dive into some of those improvements like that.
Right. And maybe this is a question for someone more familiar with the actual structure regarding the lighting, the outside lighting, outdoor lighting.
You want to tackle that one? Sure.
Would you state your name and sign in, please?
My name's Bryce Aachen. I'm with McClure Engineering Company, and we're the civil engineering representative for 4Cs. So yeah, site lighting we'd address when we get to the site plan requirements and the site plan submittal with the city. We haven't specifically looked at lighting, but if we were required during that process, we would bring the lighting on site up to code.
Okay, so that still leaves me with my question. It is not required at this point to bring that up to code by city. So, but you are willing to do that as you look at the site plan. if we were to put a condition on it, then it would be brought up to code, correct?
Yes, it would be brought up to code.
Okay,
There was a condition that needed to be met.
okay, all right. While we have him here, any other questions for,
Do you plan any improvements in the surface area of the paving around the building at all? I've noticed there's a lot of dips and holes, especially in like the southwest corner, that needs to be somehow taken account, fixed up.
So we would want to improve the areas that we're able, but we don't want to affect any areas that are already non-conforming, compliant and
No, I'm just
non-conforming.
thinking just some fill-in stuff here and there, some of the potholes and stuff.
Yeah, that's something that we would definitely take into consideration to make a safe, walkable site.
And the playground area is going to be totally enclosed by that 4-foot fence, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I did have a question, another question for the,
okay. Do you have any questions for him?
Not for the site
Okay.
engineer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Missy, would you like to please come back? We have some more questions for you.
Yes.
in your presentation, you anticipated my first question, which was about your application says that many of the slots would be available. So it's a 15% figure. That's a policy, that's a firm commitment to 15% for,
Oh, for the children on child care assistance, that is, it's 50%, so 50. That's just a model of, that just aligns with our mission and something that's just very important to us. So we just want to address the lack of quality childhood education for primarily low-income children. We seem to find that, and so we just want to address that.
and y'all operate other childcare already, right?
yeah.
And is that policy at the other places as well?
Well, it's not a policy. It is something that we believe is very important. So that Home Ties is our child care center that we run, and it's a blend of private pay children on child care assistance, and then we get some funding from the county and the state
Okay.
for other children to fill those slots.
So in your other locations, have you come close to that 50% mark? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
And you anticipate that for this particular site
Yeah.
as well?
Mhm. Those are the most hard to find in Johnson County.
You talk about how people arrive at your facility. You talk about bus and bike and walking. Has that been your experience at the other locations? Because my concern is we live in Iowa, and sometimes those other opportunities to get there don't work very well 4 months out of the year. So what has been your experience with access in bad weather?
Well, I think that this particular location is a little bit different than where our current center is, and that center will still remain open. It's always a mix. We also have access to, we have a van that currently we use to pick up families that are living in shelter, because we serve at Home Ties, we serve them in a different way, or the people that live there in a different way. And so we anticipate that we could use the van if there were barriers to access to this particular location for families, especially in the winter months. We would certainly address that on a case-by-case basis, because that's also how we operate mission-wise
Okay.
as well.
In your other locations, is it correct to assume that your high traffic area times are like early in the morning, say 7 to 8, and then late afternoon? Is that consistent?
I would say pretty consistent. Yeah, like on average, yeah.
And so how do you handle parents dropping off? I mean, do they literally have to park, bring the child in, or is there someone, staff member picking up kids or something? So I'm worried about parking here, because if they all seem to congregate around the same times, this seems like a very limited space for stack up. And but you do require parents to get out and bring their child in.
Yeah, and I think in the site plan, that's where the stacking parking is that is specifically for that drop-off and pickup, obviously knowing that there are going to be more people than 9 cars potentially coming at some time. We anticipate, I think also because the requirements are 1 parking space per employee, we have found that not all of our employees drive, not all of some of our employees carpool. And so we don't anticipate that all of those spaces will be filled, even though we may have 20 people work, 20 staff working. They may not all of those 20 spots would be full. So we would have more parking available than just those 9 stacking spots.
Okay.
If that answers your question. I mean, like, we're also kind of just speculating right now. One of the things that makes this particular location very attractive is that it is close to a bus line. Again, looking at the people that we really want to reach and have access, we are hoping that our great transit system in Iowa City is accessible enough for them to reach that building. So. But again, a lot of unknowns and a lot of speculation at this point too, I think, so.
Great, thank you.
Any more questions for the applicant? Okay, at this time, I will open the meeting for public comment. If there are any members in the public who would like to come and speak to the board in support of this application, please come to the podium, sign in, and give your name and address.
Sign in first. Hi, I'm Susan Eberly. If you could go back to the aerial shot a minute, it would save me.
Didn't put an aerial shot at the back of the deck.
Make you work here.
All right.
There. I live in the house straight south. My backyard borders what will be your parking lot. So I've watched this with considerable interest. The whole neighborhood has. And the thought of having it be childcare is wonderful. And I'm so pleased to see that. I have some information gathering, partly because people have said if you go into the meeting, you can find out about these things. I'm pleased you're going to improve the alley. We worried about that with kids and travel. It's an interesting alley. When I walk the dog, I go out a gate at the northwest corner of our property, and I cut across, and I know how rough that alley is right now because I take the dog down it. So it would be nice to see that finished off. A question I had was about that gate. That is the access to our backyard. And it has been the access, to my knowledge, ever since our house was built, I think in 55 or 56. And we've been there since 98. And it's the only access to our backyard because of the way the property is laid out and the way it's fenced. So I'd like that gate to continue to be available to me. And I will talk with you about, do we need to put a lock on that gate or something? We have an interesting backyard and we have a fish pond, and that's an attractive nuisance. And I'd worry about small kids getting over the fence to look at the fish. So I'll talk to you about how best to secure that gate. I wondered, you talked about S2, the landscaping that will border our fence along the north wall there. What is S2 standards?
Staff, would you like to answer that, please?
Sure, I can answer that. So we have basically S1 to S5, with S5 essentially being wall,
Yeah.
and with S1 being, very little landscaping. S2 is what we use generally to try and shield adjacent property owners from parking, so it somewhat hides that there's parking there. I'm going into the standard now, so I'm also kind of biding myself some time so I could give you a better answer. Generally, it's called a variable height screen, so it depends in height. There's spacing that's usually around 4 feet on center between plantings. Some of them would have to be taller, some of them could be a little shorter then. So that's the general standard in a nutshell. I can go into more depth if you want more depth.
No, and we have hurricane fencing that was there when we got the house in '98. I don't know if it's 4 feet tall. I don't know if it meets your standard. And as that all processes, maybe you could kind of keep me posted on what's going to happen in terms of fencing along our,
Well, I can answer from the site plan. They're showing the fencing all on their property. So there would be a 10-foot gap between the fencing that they're showing and your fencing.
our old fence, okay. And who maintains the space between?
It would be on their property.
Okay, all right. Yeah, right now I have a yard guy who helps me do that, which is nice. But, okay, I think that's all the questions that, I was going to ask, is the whole site going to be surveyed? We never had it surveyed when we bought the place, and I'd be curious to know if that's going to happen.
Typically,
Staff?
You can condition it.
so usually it's surveyed as far as I know when a site plan is done because it's an engineered
Yeah.
product. They would have to provide an engineered plan for us that gets submitted.
Okay, so that'll be interesting, since we've never had it done. Well, thank you, and welcome to the neighborhood.
Okay, anybody else from the public that would like to speak in support of this application? All right, are there any members of the public who would like to speak against this application? Okay. To turn the page.
There's a question I forgot to ask, and I don't know who to ask. Aren't there like some boats parked in that property, the open space back there? Who do they belong to?
I assume Marcellus? Yeah. Oh, there you go.
So what happens to those?
Excuse me, would
Oh, I'm
you
sorry,
like
yeah.
to come to the podium and sign in, please? And we'd be happy to hear your answers about the boats.
Can we condition that the boats stay?
Well, Four Seas is within their right to keep a boat if they want one. They could make it part of their landscaping.
Your kids would love that.
So my name is Tom Braverman. I'm a secretary for the Oddfellows Eureka Lodge, number 44, located at 1839 B Street. So members of the lodge make a donation to the lodge to store their boats there. That's currently what's going on. They'll be removed once the property is sold. If my nephew
I
will
just
let me
wonder what's
move it to
gonna
the
happen
farm.
them.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
All right, well, any further comments from the applicant or the engineer that's representing the applicant? All right, how about staff? Any additional comments from staff?
Nope.
Any more questions from the board for staff?
Not yet. We're still in public.
We're still open, but we're getting, okay. So anybody need any more information before I close public hearing? Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. May I have a motion to consider this exception, please?
I can motion. I move to approve EXC 230008. An application submitted by Missy Forbes of Community Coordinated Childcare requesting a special exception to allow daycare use in low-density, single-family residence zone for the property located at 1839 B Street.
Second.
Second, I'm sorry.
Okay, discussion?
Is there any interest on the part of the board to put a explicit cap on the number of allowable children?
Not especially, because parking,
I was going to say, I think parking will,
Okay, parking will keep it
And-
at 140 or under.
yes.
Okay.
uh-huh.
So the assumption is if they wanted to expand beyond that, they'd have to come back anyway if they wanted to expand behind
If they wanted to expand the parking,
No, the,
No, just the facility.
the facility
Yeah.
itself,
oh, they got, the facility
have enough
itself can
space,
accommodate over
yes.
200. Parking can accommodate 140. So if they wanted to go over 140, does that require them coming back for any sort of other exceptions on parking?
Sue?
Not unless they're making a structural change.
If they expand the use.
Use,
It's when the
right, right.
use expands.
Not the structure, just the use, yeah.
This childcare expansion,
So it would be based on the building, technically.
Right.
Okay.
The structure, yeah.
So they could go to, the building can accommodate 220, they could go to 200 with the same parking?
If they'd have to comply with our parking standards, so they couldn't expand beyond the parking.
Okay, that's what I'm...
But if they
If
expand the
there's
use.
some mechanism in place that will control the capacity. Okay. That's fine.
my concern is still the outdoor lighting and concern about light trespass into the adjacent property. I'd be in favor of putting a condition on it that the outdoor lighting must be brought to current standards. Is anybody in support of?
I can support that.
we can probably do that just because light pollution in the back. I mean, the front is fine. I don't know. It's unknown whether to fly the flag or not, so more than likely
Right.
that would maybe be off.
Well, and there is a floodlight
Yeah.
at the entrance side too, which would potentially
Can be annoying at midnight.
correct for the people across the driveway from the
Okay.
entrance.
That's fine.
Okay?
So I'm going to suggest some wording to add to the conditions?
Well, it,
It would probably be in number 4 condition, right?
yeah, it would just add a condition, and I would suggest just that that outdoor lighting be brought into compliance with current city code.
Is there any other wording that we want to put in there?
No, that's
fine.
That's perfect.
Okay. So we don't need to change the motions then?
You would have to do a 4th condition.
You'll amend it to add the condition, I think, right?
Yeah.
Amend the current motion to,
Okay, I would move that we...
I thought that would change the findings of fact or conditions.
Well, I think you clearly,
Yeah, I think you've got enough findings of fact to support the lighting. There's been enough discussion.
yeah,
I just think
'Cause the
when you.
concern is-
Right,
adjacent properties.
right. But just making sure that the final vote includes 1, 2, 3 as presented by staff, plus the 4th one, as the chair has suggested, to bring the outdoor lighting up into compliance with the current city code.
Okay.
Second.
And then how do you guys feel about sidewalks? If we're going to allow children to attend who take the bus and/or walk, there isn't a sidewalk to get to this facility. But understanding that the neighborhood itself does not have sidewalks.
Yeah.
right. I've been concerned about that, but we can't require any other property owner to install sidewalks. So it is a very big concern.
I mean, we could add condition 5 and just have it that one parcel. But understanding sidewalks in the future will possibly happen.
Your discussion could also just be forwarded to city council in the planning of CIP, because there have been additional sidewalks in that neighborhood in the last year or two added.
I wouldn't favor that if the other properties are not affected. I mean, to me, it seems pointless to put a sidewalk in something. They're going to get to that area and then have a sidewalk, when the whole neighborhood ought to be under consideration for sidewalks.
At the same time, they're walking up a driveway to get to the facility.
And
I don't,
And are they
there's a sidewalk there.
going up to the facility?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And putting a sidewalk along the front of the current building most people, if they're taking the bus, they're going to come up B, and they'll reach the drive and the sidewalk up to the entrance before they would get to any sidewalk in front of the building.
No, I understand. It's more of a future thing where sidewalks will
Right.
infill the rest of the neighborhood. But Sue, how do we forward that to the council?
I think the council will get your minutes, but certainly you could do just an additional sort of memo. It could be from staff saying that as part of this, there was discussion and the board feels that it's important for all neighborhoods. I mean, we have a streets
It would not be a
policy.
condition then.
Right,
I was going to say, how do
Right.
I,
That's not a
how do I
condition.
trip a memo?
You just tell me to
into-
do it.
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And Kirk can include it then in your packet for the next meeting, too.
Just because it's children, and if we're going
Correct.
to do this entire marketing strategy over walking or taking a bus, I mean, how do children usually, it's conditioning.
Right, I'm in support of a memo and, okay. Any other questions or discussion amongst us about,
No, it looks like a good project, and, I think the city and the neighborhood are both going to benefit.
Yeah. I mean, the questions that I had were answered by the applicant, and they talked about child care desert, so the 1 mile clause and everything within that. So 50% is impoverished children or of need of further child care is a great thing for these neighborhoods.
okay. All right, so can I have a statement regarding finding of facts, please?
Yes, regarding item EXE 0008, or 23-0008, I concur with the findings set forth in the staff report as of 8 November, and conclude that the general and specific standards are satisfied, except we want to add the fourth condition, right? To change conditions or add to conditions?
To bring the outdoor lighting up to
Yeah.
current standards.
We, as the board, recommend adding the fourth condition of bringing outdoor lighting into city code.
All right,
Do I have to have a second for that?
no. So, roll call?
Baker,
Yes.
Carlson, Parker,
Yes.
Russo, Swigert.
Yes. This motion is declared approved. Any person desiring to appeal this decision to a court of record may do so within 30 days after this decision is filed with the city clerk's office. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Looking forward to it. All right, we are going to move on now to the second item on our agenda. And that is EXC 23-0004, a request submitted by Jennifer Colville, Porchlight Literary Center, to extend the deadline for a condition that 4 bicycle parking spaces be installed in compliance with Article 14-5A of the zoning code within 6 months of the date of a decision of the Board of Adjustment was filed for EXC 23-004, a special exception approved to allow a religious/private group assembly use in a neighborhood stabilization residential RNS-12 zone, and to reduce the setback requirements at 1019 East Washington Street.
Is there an entire staff presentation about this again?
No,
Okay.
it's not a public hearing either.
Okay.
I'm
So
happy to-
I need a motion.
Is there a
Yes, just a
specific
motion.
time that we're?
I need a
6 more
motion.
months, right?
I can,
And may I please have a motion
but
so
I
we
don't
can
know what to-
discuss?
To move unless it's, we have a specific.
you can ask for a staff presentation.
I don't want a staff presentation.
It will be brief.
Do we have to have the motion before?
I'll make a motion, excuse me. How about, I move to approve a request submitted by Jennifer Colville, Porchlight Literary Center, to extend the deadline from 6 months to 12 months for the condition that 4 bicycle parking spaces be installed in compliance with Article 14-5A of the zoning code within 6 months of the date of a decision of the Board of Adjustment was filed for EXC 23-0004, a special exception approved to allow a religious/private group assembly use in a neighborhood stabilization residential RNS-12 zone, and to reduce the setback requirements at 1019 East Washington Street. Do I have a second?
Second. And that was my question, to move it to what? I
Okay,
didn't know.
so
That was pretty
discussion.
good. Did you have that all typed out?
I did.
I'm like, what is?
I did. Are you kidding? Yes. All right, so 6 months, discussion, 6 months would, it was filed around May 15th of 2023. So that would give her till May 15th, approximately, 2024.
Sure.
Does anybody think she needs longer, or
This is just biking, right?
it's a bicycle parking pad?
Yeah. That's
Right,
fine.
okay.
She's
So we
probably,
need-
she's probably not going to do it over the winter, so is May going to be warm enough?
It's not a big project.
No, I realize this, but
Right.
an extension is an extension for a reason, so.
I don't know construction well enough to know if it's going to be warm enough, but I would assume she can have everything lined up. She's got time now to
I think it'll be
line
fine.
everything up and, okay. All right, so, no, let's vote. We'll have a roll call, please.
Baker,
Yes.
Carlson, Parker.
Yes.
Russo, Swigert.
Yes. The motion is declared approved. Any person desiring to appeal this decision to a court of record may do so within 30 days after this decision is filed with the city clerk's office. All right, consideration of minutes. Any corrections?
I did not look them over. I apologize.
Well, I need a motion to approve the minutes.
We approve the minutes for the meeting of July the 12th, 2023.
Second, I guess.
Okay. Let's just take a voice vote. All those that approve? Yes?
Yes.
Opposed? Okay.
Should I say nay just to say it?
Well, that would actually cancel it, I think.
Any staff announcements?
Well, you might not for minutes, but.
Any
Staff announcements. The next meeting is scheduled for December 13th. We have not received an application yet, so the application is due by Friday at noon, so I'm assuming we will not have a December meeting. I believe that's my only announcement at the moment. I guess one more announcement. At some point, we need to discuss bylaws. We usually try to review those relatively regularly. I know that there are some minor corrections that we have to them that we'd like to see. So maybe we would do that in December if we do want to meet then, or we can just do it on another meeting that looks relatively light. But it shouldn't be anything too crazy. It's nothing substantive. It's more
I was going to say, it's
Tweaking-
never been more than 5 minutes, ever.
just tweaking around the edges mostly.
Yeah.
So that's my only other announcement, just to give you a heads up on that. Yeah.
Okay, so the meeting is adjourned.